Someone asked, "Can one become a sage through learning?" Master Lian Shi said, "Yes." "Is there any essential way?" "Yes." "Please explain it to me." The essential way is to concentrate on one thing. By concentrating on one thing is meant having no desire. Having no desire, one is vacuous while tranquil, and straightforward while in action. Being vacuous while tranquil, one becomes intelligent and hence penetrating. Being straightforward while active, one becomes impartial and hence all-embracing. Being intelligent, penetrating, impartial, and all-embracing, one is almost a sage. Someone said, concentration on one thing means complete singleness of mind. Vacuity and tranquility means that the mind is comparable to a clear mirror or still water, without an iota of selfish desire in it. Therefore, all its activities ensue from the operation of the principle of nature, and are not disturbed by an iota of selfish desire. Vacuity and tranquility is substance, while straightforwardness in action is function. Is that correct? Jushi answered, "Generally correct." Master Cheng said, "When yang first grows, it is very subtle. It can grow only if it is peaceful and tranquil." Therefore, a comment on the abstract meaning of the fu, to return, hexagram says, the ancient kings closed the passes on the day of the solstice. On the day of the winter solstice, yin has accumulated. Yang begins to grow but is very subtle. Unless it is nourished by peace and tranquility, its force will not be strong enough to become the foundation of growth. On this day, the passes between stations were closed so that merchants and travelers would not move about. Dukes and lords would not inspect their states. People both above and below would be at peace and tranquil in order to nourish their subtle yang. Shi Huang, Wu. Someone asked, "This is the principle according to which activity is possible only after there has been tranquility. Is that right? For example, the principle of nature inherent in man is very subtle. There must not be any selfish desire to disturb it. Then it will proceed to operate smoothly." Jushi said, "That is the way to look at it." Activity, rest, restraint, and relaxation serve to nourish one's life. Drink, food, and clothing serve to nourish one's body. Disposition, appearance, and conduct, according to righteousness, serve to nourish one's virtue, and extending one's virtue to others serves to nourish mankind. Be careful with speech, so as to nourish your virtue. Regulate food so as to nourish your body. Nothing is more immediate and more important than speech and food. When thunder arouses and startles all within 100 li, the sacrificer will not let go his spoon or cup of sacrificial spirit. Only with sincerity and seriousness can one remain peaceful and not be at a loss in the face of shocks and fear. This is the way to handle shocks. One cannot be at ease when he is resting, because he is stirred with desires. How can he rest when desires pull him forward? Therefore, the principle of the hexagram, ken, to stop, is that one should stop at the back of a thing. What can be seen is in front. The back of a thing is behind it, and therefore cannot be seen. When one stops at the point which cannot be seen, there will be no desires to disturb his mind, and he can rest at ease. See not the person means not seeing oneself, that is, not being conscious of oneself. When one is no longer conscious of himself, he can be at rest. There is no way to do so if he cannot rid himself of self-consciousness. Walk in the hall and do not see the people in it. The space between the hall and the porch is very near, but if one stops with his back to it, even what is nearest cannot be seen. This means that one is not lured into contact with external things. When he is free from such contact, internal desires will not arise. To rest in this way is to do so according to the proper principle of resting. In this kind of resting, there will be no error. In the Book of Changes, to stop means to stop in the proper place. This theory is perfectly correct. I'm afraid Cheng is wrong in interpreting it to mean stopping at the point which cannot be seen. To stop means to stop at the proper place, that is, the best place for one to abide, as humanity for the ruler and seriousness for the minister. Seeing not the person means not to have oneself in view, and not seeing the people means not to have others in view. In other words, have neither oneself nor others, but only moral principles in view. What do you think of the theory that when one is free from contact with external things, his internal desires will not arise? Jushi answered, the idea of having no contact with external things is difficult to understand. Under ordinary circumstances, how can we avoid it? I believe Cheng meant only that when we are in contact with people, we should see that we stop at the proper place according to principles so that we will not be influenced by selfish ideas produced by contact with external things. According to books on acupuncture and cauterization, man's 5 internal organs depend on the back. Although it does not move itself, all the movements of the body depend on it. Therefore, only those who can calm their nature can learn how to stop at the back. Cheng. If one does not preserve his mind and nourish his nature, he will merely be talking. Sages and worthies have uttered thousands and thousands of words primarily from their desire that people should recover their lost minds and keep them under control. If one can put his mind back into his own person, he will naturally seek to go toward higher things, and he can then study things on the lower level and penetrate things on the higher level. Liu asked, usually when things happen, we know how to hold fast and preserve our minds. But when nothing happens, how can we preserve our minds and nourish our nature thoroughly? Cheng Hao answered, considering their listening to music, their observing ceremonies, and their daily movements, the ancients had inscriptions carved or written on their bathtubs, food dishes, desks, and staffs, so that whether they were in action or at rest, there was something to help them nourish their minds. This practice is no longer observed. The only thing that will help us to nourish our minds is moral principles. If we hold on to these principles of cultivation, in time we shall nourish our minds very well. Seriousness is to straighten the external life. This is the meaning of cultivation and nourishment. Liu Yushu once said, my trouble is that I have many worries and cannot drive them out of my mind. Cheng Hao said, this is just like resisting robbers in a ruined house. Before you chase away the one who has entered from the east, another one comes from the west. They come in from all directions, and there is no time to chase all of them away. The reason is that the house is exposed on all sides so that robbers can come in easily, and there is no way for one to be the master of his own house and keep the situation under control. It is like water coming into an empty vessel. Naturally the water comes in, but if the vessel is filled with water, even if you put it under water, how can water get in? For whatever has a master inside is no longer empty. Since it is not empty, external troubles cannot come in. Then there will be nothing to worry you. Xing Ho Shu said, "We must always cherish and nourish our energy. We shall get tired as soon as it is deficient, and shall then be laboring whenever we handle anything, and shall lack sincerity. This will be evident in our speech when we entertain guests. How much more when we handle important affairs?" Master Mingtao said, "The student should completely preserve his mind. Although his studies may not be complete, as things come to him he should not fail to respond, but should respond according to his capacity. If he does not hit the mark, he will not be far from it." This merely means to preserve the mind completely and not to be overcome by selfish desires. It does not mean that there is another mind that can preserve this mind. Be respectful in private life, be serious in handling affairs, and be loyal in dealing with others. This saying penetrates both the higher and the lower levels. Fundamentally, the sage has nothing else to say. Respect is seriousness expressed externally. In one's private life, one should be grave and austere, and dignified in his countenance. When one handles affairs, he should be serious, and when one deals with others, he should be loyal. Thus he extends his moral discipline from dealing with himself to dealing with others. From the initial learning to the completion of virtue, there is no other way. Cheng, the student should hold fast to the mind with seriousness. He should not be anxious. Instead, he should nourish and cultivate it deeply, earnestly, and immerse himself in it. Only then can he be at ease with himself. If one seeks anxiously, that is merely selfishness. In the end, he will not be able to understand the way. Changhao, have no depraved thoughts. Never lack seriousness. If one follows only these two teachings and puts them into practice, how can he make any mistake? Any mistake is due to the lack of seriousness and to incorrectness of thought. Nowadays, students are serious but do not show any evidence of it. Therefore, they are not at ease. All this is simply because in their minds they are not at home with seriousness. It is also because they carry seriousness too far in dealing with things. This is what is meant by respectfulness without the rules of propriety becomes laborious bustle. Being respectful in this case means making a personal effort to be respectful. Rules of propriety are not a body of ceremonies but natural principles. Because one is only respectful without practicing natural principles, he is not at home with himself. One must be respectful and yet at ease. Now, the reason why one must be right in appearance and correct in speech is not merely to attain goodness for himself and see what others will say. It is because according to the principle of nature he should be so. Basically, there should be no selfish ideas, but only accordance with principle. The statement that rules of propriety are not a body of ceremonies merely means that they are intangible. Any personal effort should follow natural moral principles. One will then be at ease. Now our minds are set on moral principles and yet we are not happy. Why? Precisely because we unnecessarily try artificially to help the mind grow. Although hold it fast and you preserve it, and let it go and you lose it, is a true statement, yet if one holds it too fast, that will be always doing something with expectation, but we must avoid these mistakes. One is unhappy in his mind simply because his virtue is only an isolated instance. One whose virtue is not an isolated instance will have neighbors. When one's virtue becomes immanent, nothing will obstruct his mind, and it will overflow as if it met its own spring on the left and the right. Seriousness without fail is the state of equilibrium before the feelings of pleasure, anger, sorrow, and joy are aroused. Seriousness is not equilibrium itself, but seriousness without fail is the way to attain equilibrium. Asked about seriousness without fail, Jushi said, "Not to hold on to it firmly means to fail." Someone asked, "Does seriousness without fail mean that one's mind is completely serious and that one is without an iota of non-seriousness? And that one is without an iota of non-seriousness in thought or act?" Jushi answered, "It merely means to be serious at all times. Seriousness is the way to equilibrium." Master Cheng did not mention the cultivation of moral principles. In a general sense, both the state before the feelings are aroused and the state after the feelings are aroused require the same effort. One must, of course, preserve his mind and nourish his nature before the feelings are aroused. But he must also carefully examine himself after the feelings are aroused. Basically, seriousness without fail is not equilibrium. But in seriousness without fail, the condition of equilibrium can be seen. This is similar to the fact that impartiality is not identical with humanity. But when one is impartial and without selfishness, one is humane. Equilibrium is original with our nature. We must devote our effort to cultivate it before it can be manifested. So this is annotations, by the way, if it's confusing you. It's the original statements are mostly from Cheng and Cheng Hao, and the comments are usually Jushi's. Sima Ziwei wrote the treatise on sitting down and forgetting everything. This is what is called chasing while sitting down. Suma wanted to stop his thoughts, but that is precisely not the way to stop one's thoughts. When one makes up his mind to sit down and forget everything, it means that he sits down and his mind chases after external things. One day, while Po Chun was living in the Bureau of Provisions in Chang'an, he was sitting at leisure. He looked at the columns in the corridor and counted them in his mind. After he had finished, he had no doubt about the number, but when he counted them again, the number did not agree. He could not keep from having someone count them aloud, and found that the number agreed with his original count. From this we know that the more one exerts his mind to hold on to a thing, the more unsure he is. If one exerts his mind to hold on to a thing, his mind is already disturbed. Therefore, he gets farther and farther off the track. If the mind, in playing the role of one's master, is not calm, it will be just like an ever-revolving wheel, turning and moving without stop for a single moment. The mind is affected in 10,000 ways. If one does not master it, what can be done? Chang Tianshi once said he had vowed that for several years he would stop thinking as soon as he had gone to bed. After one had stopped thinking, one would have to subdue and restrain the mind with special effort, and to do so, one would have to put the mind into something with physical features. All this is unnatural. Chunshi said he knew the trick, and that it was to think of the word mean. In this case, he is bound by the mean. Furthermore, what physical features does the mean have? Cheng wanted to cut off all thought, but then the mind would have had no place on which to base itself. Sima Kuang wanted to place the mind in the mean, but then after all, he would have been attached to it. Chang Tianchi wanted to control things from the outside so they would not disturb the mind, while Sima Kuang wanted to hold on to the things inside so the mind would not be disturbed by external things. This is what Jushi called arbitrarily cutting off something and stiffly adhering to something. What physical features has the mean? Where can you lay hold of it? The mind is already disturbed, and now this thing is added to it. The mean cannot be laid hold of here or there. How can Sima Kuang lay hold of it? Although Chang Tianchi grabbed hard, he held something firmly in the mind. Let Sima Kuang think of the mean as he pleased, he only aroused more things in the mind. That was why he could not sleep. Chang Tianchi arbitrarily cut off something, while Sima Kuang stiffly adhered to something. It is like something with a home, who does not become its master but asks someone else to do so. There are men who always seem to have two people in their minds. When one wants to do good, there seems to be evil to obstruct him, and when he wants to do evil, there seems to be a sense of shame. There are not really two people. What happens in the mind is a sure evidence of its own conflicts. One must hold the will firm, so the vital force cannot disturb him. One can then readily see the evidence. Essentially, sages and worthies never suffer from such mental defects as these conflicts. This is to say that, if in dealing with things there is the conflict between good and evil, it is because the mind is not its own master. If one holds the will firm and is not overcome by the vital force, then one is firmly the master. What confusion can there be? One has only one mind. If there were one mind to subdue and restrict, and another mind to be subdued and restricted, there would be two minds. In that case, there would seem to be two people. When one mind wanted to do good, another mind that wanted to do evil would prevent it. And when one mind wanted to do evil, another mind with a sense of shame would stop it. Mingtao. When I practice calligraphy, I am very serious. My objective is not that the calligraphy must be good, rather my practice is the way of moral training. We must understand what is meant by training here. The purpose is not to write beautiful characters, but to preserve the mind and nourish the nature in this very act. Preserving and nourishing must continue at all times. Once they are neglected, the principle of nature inherent in oneself will be interrupted. Only with seriousness can the mind be preserved and the principle retained. This is why he said that it is the way of moral training. Shi Huang. Cheng. The sage does not make an attempt to remember things. He can therefore always remember. People today forget things because they try to remember them. Both inability to remember and roughness in handling things are the result of imperfect and weak nourishment of the mind. Someone asked, the sage does not attempt to remember things and therefore can always remember, but people today forget because they try to remember things. Why? Jushi said, the sage's mind is vacuous and clear. That is why he can do it. Ordinary people try to remember things but forget them because they are deliberate. When Mingtao was in Shanzhou, he needed a long piece of lumber to repair a bridge. He sought it extensively among the population. After that, whenever he went out and saw some good lumber, calculating thoughts rose in him. Therefore he told his students about this and warned them not to have anything attached to their minds. Someone asked, in everything one must think before he can understand. Why say that one should not have a thing in his mind? Jushi answered, why shouldn't we think about things? However, when a thing is part of the past, one should not allow it to linger in his mind. There is nothing better than seriousness for entering into the way. Cheng. No one has been able to extend knowledge without seriousness. Without seriousness, one's mind will be beclouded and mixed. Thus, principle cannot be understood, and knowledge cannot be extended. By holding fast to seriousness, one's mind will be clear and can see principle perfectly well. Right and wrong will then not be confused. In this way, knowledge can be extended. Nowadays, people do not calmly master their minds. They regard the mind as an enemy who cannot be subdued. Thus, it is not that things impede the mind, but that the mind impedes things. We must realize that there is not a single thing in the world that should not have been there. We must not hate anything. People today do not preserve their minds with seriousness. Their minds are not calm. They fear that their minds will be disturbed by things and complicated by them. They therefore avoid everything, subdue their own minds, and refuse to think. This is to regard the mind as an enemy who cannot be subdued, and to hate external things as an impediment. Are things really an impediment to the mind? Rather, people shackle their own minds and put them in the position of uselessness. As a result, things and affairs in the world are not managed. This is to impede things with the mind. The mind is the master that handles things. All things are already complete in oneself. All things, whether big or small, and whether refined or coarse, have their self-evident principles. What is the thing that should not have been there? If we realize that things are not unnecessary, we should know how to handle them. Why regard them as an impediment and hate them? To hate a thing is not to be serious. This is what is meant by suffering a mental defect. What man has is nothing but the principle of nature. If he cannot preserve it, how can he remain a man? People often cannot be tranquil in their thought because they have not calmly mastered their minds. The only way to master one's mind is to let it rest in the thing one is doing, as when one is a ruler, one abides rest in humanity. Take, for example, Emperor Shun's execution of the 4 criminals. They themselves had committed the crimes, and Shun therefore executed them. Did Shun have any personal feeling or selfish desire in the matter? To rest means to rest in the principles of things as they should be, as in the doctrine taught in the great learning. To be a ruler, one should rest in humanity. If in handling things one rests in the right thing, there will be no trouble with confused or disturbing thoughts. People cannot rest in the things they are doing because they grab many other things and cannot leave things as they are. To leave things as they are is to make things serve oneself, but to be a slave to things is to let things make one serve them. As there are things, there are their specific principles. One must rest in the thing one is doing. Specific principles are inherent in things. It is in them that one should rest. To leave things as they are means to rest where one should rest. That is, to rest in the principle of the thing one is doing. When one rests in the thing he is doing, then the way in which he handles the thing will be calm. Why should there be any fear that his thoughts will not be tranquil? One does not move others simply because he is not perfectly sincere. When one feels wearied or tired while doing things, that is a case of lack of sincerity. When one observes the myriad things after one becomes tranquil, they will all naturally show their impulses of spring. To be tranquil means to be free from the impurities of selfishness or rashness, and to be very much at home in preserving the mind and nourishing the nature. Tranquility involves both activity and inactivity. It means calmness of mind and not absence of activity. The impulses of spring mean the operation of Yang. The impulses of spring means the operation of yang, active cosmic force, in the spring, that is, the feeling of production and reproduction. When one's mind has become tranquil, if one looks at the myriad things, he will find that they all naturally show a flourishing feeling of life which does not stop for a moment. One will feel identified with humanity and be full of the feeling of love for life. The mind of heaven and earth to produce things is revealed at all times and in everything, whether things are big or small, and whether they are refined or coarse. They all naturally reveal this mind. This is called the impulse of spring. The word spring does not denote merely the first of the 4 seasons. In the midst of excitement of the great transformation of the universe, man's feelings are numerous and confused, and therefore he is unable to realize the mind of heaven and earth to produce things. If he cultivates himself long enough, concentrated in spirit and calm in thought, and is so tranquil as to be one with the universe, and if he personally realizes the principle of nature everywhere, he will see that all living beings, whether birds, fish, insects, or animals, and all things, whether light blue, dark blue, green, or yellow, whatever he sees or hears, are naturally full of vitality, showing the clear operation of the principle of nature. When Confucius talked about humanity, he merely said, "When you go abroad, behave to everyone as if you were receiving a great guest. Employ the people as if you were assisting at a great sacrifice. But the general condition desired is that in which one's mind is broad and one's body at ease, and all one's movements and expressions are exactly proper according to the rules of propriety and are natural. The way to hold on to humanity is to be watchful over oneself when alone." Someone said, "The general condition desired can be possible only with effort every day. It is impossible if one simply goes abroad one day and behaves to everyone as if he were receiving a great guest, or employs people one day as if he were assisting at a great sacrifice." Jushi said, "But one must start like this before the condition can be possible. The point is simply that if one can always keep this in mind, the condition will be achieved." Humanity is rooted in the mind, demonstrated through the body, and revealed in movements and expressions. If there is the slightest selfish desire, the mind will not be broad, the body not at ease, and movements and expressions not in accord with the natural measures of the principle of nature. Confucius mentioned going abroad and employing the people to show that essentially this is true in everything. His idea was to hold on to humanity at all times. But unless one is careful before going abroad or employing people, and is careful in those situations where one's act is only known to himself, one may not be able to hold on to humanity when one is momentarily affected. The only way to hold on to humanity is to be watchful over oneself when alone. The sage cultivates himself with seriousness, so as to give other people security and peace. When the ruler is sincere and reverent, the world will be in order and at peace. When both the superior and the inferior are reverent and serious, heaven and earth will naturally attain their proper order, and all things will naturally flourish. All material forces will be in harmony, and the 4 supernatural creatures will arrive. This is the way to embody faithfulness and to arrive at harmony. Quickness of apprehension, intelligence, insight, and wisdom all come from this. With this we can serve heaven and offer sacrifices to the Lord on high. To embody faithfulness is to embody sincerity and faithfulness, and to arrive at harmony is to have the way of harmony operate everywhere. Quickness of apprehension, intelligence, insight, and wisdom all come from this, means that they come from seriousness. With this we can serve heaven and offer sacrifices to the Lord on high refers to seriousness. To embody faithfulness is concretely to realize this principle in one's own person. To arrive at harmony means that when the feelings are aroused, each and all attain due measure and degree, and when they are extended to everything in the world, there will be no case in which they are not in accord. Faithfulness is nothing but true principle, and harmony is but the material forces in perfect concord. To embody faithfulness is to achieve the equilibrium before the feelings are aroused, and to arrive at harmony is to achieve the harmony after the feelings are aroused. To embody faithfulness means not to have an iota of insincerity, and to arrive at harmony means to have the feelings aroused and to attain due measure and degree so that everything is in its right place. Quickness of apprehension, intelligence, insight, and wisdom all come from it. This is what is meant by, given sincerity, there will be enlightenment. Because of the harmony of the material forces in the world, the four supernatural creatures, being lucky signs, appear in response to it. When one has thoroughly preserved his mind and nourished his nature, if he keeps going calmly, there will be progress. Do nothing shameful in the recesses of your own house, and your mind will be peaceful and your body will be at ease. The mind must always be kept inside the body. If there is any crack on the outside, it will run away. If one lets his mind go astray, how can he keep it in the body? This is why Mencius emphatically taught people to seek the lost mind. If one lets his mind go astray all day, his body will be like a boat without a pilot. It will drift to the east and then to the west, while the people aboard are unaware of it. I once said that before one reads, he must collect his mind in his body. Only then can he read and discover moral principles. Cracks on the outside refer to the desires of the ears, eyes, mouth, and nose for external things. When that happens, the mind will be lost and will no longer remain in the body. Seeing, hearing, speaking, and acting are all cracks. Although there may be cracks outside, it is really because of the neglect of internal effort that the mind runs away. If one holds fast to it and preserves it firmly and completely, so that the mind and the body form a perfect union, how can any crack appear? The human mind must always be lively, then it will operate everywhere without end and will not be confined to one corner. Someone asked, "What is meant by being lively?" Jushi answered, "When the mind is free from selfishness, it can immediately extend itself and operate everywhere. To be lively means not to be dead." How? Heaven and earth have their fixed positions, and yet the system of change operates in them. This is nothing but seriousness. With seriousness, there will be no interruption. Never lack seriousness. One can then face the Lord on high. Seriousness overcomes all evil. Seriousness is to straighten the internal life, and righteousness is to square the external life. This is humanity. If one purposely uses seriousness to straighten his internal life, it will not be straightened. But if one is always doing something without expectation, it will be straight. Someone asked, "Why is seriousness to straighten the internal life and righteousness to square the external life humanity?" Jushi answered, "It is humanity, yes, whenever one can reach the point of completely eliminating his selfish desires so that the principle of nature will operate, there is humanity. Seriousness is to straighten the internal life, means not to have the slightest selfish idea, but to have the mind perfectly clear and completely one in all its aspects. Righteousness is to square the external life, means that when one sees right, he decides to do it, and when he sees wrong, he decides not to do it. He is then absolutely square and correct. In this way, selfish desires will be completely eliminated, the principle of nature will prevail, and the character of the human mind will be preserved. Therefore, it is called humanity. However, the Book of Changes does not say, use seriousness to straighten the internal life, but instead says, seriousness is to straighten the internal life. For if one purposely uses seriousness to straighten his internal life, his mind is already partial and is not straight. Always be doing something without expectation means that seriousness is something that should be practiced, and one should not practice it only because he expects certain results. Hence, it is called straight. If one cultivates himself, he will attain his unity. Unity means being undivided and unmixed. It refers to the original substance of the mind. If cultivated, the mind will be tranquil, pure, peaceful, and clear, free from the defects of becloudedness and neglect. Unity means sincerity in the absence of selfish desires. Without selfish desires, the mind is one, and with selfish desires, it is divided. The phrase, his unity, means that the human mind is a great ultimate, and the great ultimate is inherent in oneself. Therefore, it is not necessary to grab it from the outside. Cheng. Confucius, standing by a stream, said, "It passes on like this, never ceasing day or night." None of the Confucianists from the Han dynasty down has understood the meaning of this. It shows that the mind of the sage is characterized by purity, which is also unceasing. Purity which is unceasing is the character of heaven. He who possesses the character of heaven is able to practice the kingly way. The important point of all this lies in being watchful over oneself when alone. The general idea of the passage is that things in the past have been unceasing, just as the operation of the universe is unceasing. The master wanted to warn the student to be similarly unceasing in his effort, for the mind of the sage is characterized by purity which is unceasing. He could therefore understand all this. Things in the universe always pass on because the perfect sincerity of heaven and earth is unceasing. Affected by this unceasing process, the mind of the sage is pure and is unceasingly so. To be unceasingly pure means to be completely identified with the principle of nature without any interruption by selfish desires. This is the character of heaven. The kingly way is necessarily based on the character of heaven, for the kingly way emphasizes purity, and without purity it will be mixed with the despotic way. Without the character of heaven, there will be selfish thoughts and calculation. Latter-day people are mostly without the character of heaven. That is why they cannot practice the kingly way. It is desirable that the student examine himself at all times without the slightest interruption. As soon as he stops examining himself, there will be interruption. This is why the important point lies in being watchful over oneself when alone, for one is often interrupted when alone. If one does not preserve himself, no advantage will come to him. If one does not establish himself, even if he intends to do good, he will still be overcome by material things. One must not allow the myriad things in the world to disturb him. Once one has established himself, he can handle things in the world very well. If one does not establish himself, his mind will not be under control. Even though he does good, he will still be disturbed by the diverse. He will still be disturbed by the desire to chase after things. If one can establish himself, he can handle things freely. All things will be at his command. What disturbance will there be? If one does not establish himself, he will not be a master. Although he intends to do good, he will go toward a thing only when he thinks that that thing is good. This is to be overcome by things. Cheng. The trouble of the student is that his thoughts are confused and that his mind is not calm or tranquil. This is a common defect. He only needs to make up his mind. After that, things will be all right. Only after one has made up his mind will things be all right. It is like building a house. If there is no foundation, how can a house be built? If one is on guard against depravity, sincerity will be preserved. One does not seize something called sincerity outside and preserve it. People today are slaves to evil outside and seek a good within, evil to preserve. How can they enter into virtue this way? If one only is on guard against depravity, sincerity will naturally be preserved. This is why Mencius said that goodness of nature comes from within. Simply be sincere and sincerity will be preserved. What more effort does being on guard against depravity require? If one is simply correct in movement and appearance, and orderly in thoughts and deliberations, seriousness will naturally grow in him. Seriousness is nothing but concentration on one thing. When one concentrates on one thing, he goes off neither to the east nor to the west, but remains in the center. And he goes off neither to this place nor to that place, but remains within. When the originally good mind is preserved, the principle of nature will naturally become clear to him. The student must cultivate his mind with seriousness while he straightens the internal life. It is fundamental to straighten the internal life. In Tuan said, "What appearance has seriousness? If one's body and mind are collected, one will be concentrating on one thing. For example, when a person enters a temple or an ancestral hall to show his reverence, and his mind is collected and not attached to anything in the slightest degree, is that not concentration on one thing?" Asked about concentration on one thing, Jushi said, "When you do a thing, just do it. After you have done one thing, then do another. Before they finish one thing, people today want to do another. Consequently, their minds are all confused. Concentration on one thing involves both activity and tranquility. If one is on guard against depravity, that of course constitutes concentration on one thing. But if one concentrates on one thing, there will be no need to speak of being on guard against depravity. There are some who think that concentration on one thing is difficult to understand and do not know what to do. Concentration on one thing is nothing but orderliness and graveness. With these, the mind will be concentrated. As it is concentrated, it will naturally not do anything wrong. If one cultivates the mind for a long time, the principle of nature will become clear to him. If one only realizes that depravity is here and is on guard against it, the mind is concentrated. Therefore, it is said that being on guard against depravity, of course, constitutes concentration of the mind. Since the mind is concentrated, depravity cannot enter. Therefore, it is not necessary to be on further guard against it. Suppose one knows that tonight there is a thief outside against whom he must be on guard. He is now alert. Since he is already alert, it is not necessary to say that he must now be on guard against the thief." Someone asked, "To what does the mind adhere before it is acted on?" Answer, "Hold it fast and you preserve it. Let it go and you lose it. It comes in and goes out at no definite time and without anyone's knowing its direction. How will it look for a place to adhere to? One has only to hold it fast. The way to hold it fast is to straighten the internal life with seriousness." Someone asked about the passage, "How will it look for a place to adhere? One has only to hold it fast." Jushi answered, "It is difficult to say. The difference is very little. One must think the matter over again and again until one understands. If before the mind is acted on, one has to hold on to that to which the mind adheres, that would mean there were two things to hold on to. That is why Master Cheng said only to hold the mind fast. To hold fast means that the master is present. One who is serious is naturally vacuous and tranquil, but vacuity and tranquility cannot be called seriousness. Master Cho considers tranquility to be fundamental, primarily because he wants people's minds to be tranquil and calm, and he wants people to be their own master. Master Cheng, on the other hand, is afraid that if people merely seek tranquility, they will not have anything to do with things and affairs. He therefore talks about seriousness. If one is serious, one is naturally vacuous and tranquil. If one is serious, there will be no idle, impure thoughts, and one will naturally be vacuous and tranquil. The first concern of the student should of course be with his mind and his will, but some people want to discard all sensation and consciousness, and that would be to abandon sageliness and discard wisdom. Others want to discard all thought because they fear that it is confusing and disturbing. Then they would have to sit in meditation and enter into calmness. Suppose here is a clear mirror. It is its normal nature to reflect all things. It is difficult not to have it reflect them. Similarly, the human mind cannot but interact with the myriad things, and it is difficult not to have it engaged in thinking. If one wants to avoid confusion and disturbance, his mind must have a master. What can be its master? Seriousness and seriousness only. With a master, the mind will be vacuous, and if it is vacuous, depravity cannot enter into it. Without a master, the mind will be filled. To be filled means that external things will seize it. If one's mind lacks a master, depravity from outside will come in to fill it. Generally speaking, one's mind cannot be devoted to two things. When it is devoted to one thing, other things cannot come in, for that thing will be its master. If a thing is its master, it is free from the trouble of confused and disturbing thought. How much more so if seriousness is the master? Seriousness means concentration on one thing, and concentration on one thing means not to get away from it. Now let us ponder deeply the meaning of concentration on one thing. If not concentrated, the mind will become divided. As to not daring to be deceitful or disrespectful, and not doing anything shameful in the recesses of one's own house, all these are matters of seriousness. Not to get away from a thing means not to leave it. For example, when you sit here, just sit here and don't think of going outside. When you stand in front of the door, don't think of going to another place. Not to be deceitful concerns the internal life. Not to be disrespectful concerns the external life. And not to do anything shameful in the recesses of one's own house concerns both the internal and external life. To be grave and austere is not the way to be serious, but in order to achieve seriousness, one must start with this. Seriousness exists inside, whereas gravity and austerity are expressed outside. However, no one can be serious in his mind while he is careless and easygoing in his appearance. Shun diligently practice virtue. How can one practice virtue before coming into contact with things? By holding on to seriousness as fundamental. This is already the practice of virtue. From this point of view, the way of the sage does not mean to be silent and no more. There is no interruption in the operation of the principle of nature, and there is also no interruption in the sage's determination to practice virtue. Although one has not yet come into contact with things, if one is alert and firmly regards seriousness as fundamental, so that the principle of nature operates in his mind, that is diligence. To be earnest without interruption is to practice virtue. Question. When one is at leisure, is it all right for his body to be negligent if his mind is not slack? Answer. Is there anyone who sits like a basket, whose mind is not slack? Lu Talin came from Kosher in the middle of June. I peeped at him when he was at leisure and found that he was always sitting formally with dignity. He was earnest and sincere indeed. A student must be respectful and serious, but should not be rigid. If rigid, the respect and seriousness will not last long. Question. Although one has many thoughts and deliberations, if they arise in connection with proper things, are they not harmless? Answer. For example, regarding respect as fundamental when one is in ancestral temples, regarding gravity as fundamental when one is in court, and regarding sternness as fundamental when one is in the army, are such cases as you have described. But if thoughts arise at an inappropriate time, are confused, and lack proper measure and degree, they are evil if they arise in connection with proper things. Su Ming asked, is it all right to seek equilibrium before the feelings of pleasure, anger, sorrow, and joy are aroused? Answer. No. To think of seeking it before the feelings of pleasure, anger, sorrow, and joy are aroused is, after all, a thought, and thought is an aroused state. Thought is the same as pleasure, anger, sorrow, and joy. As soon as it is aroused, the state may be described as harmony, but not as equilibrium. Further question. Academician Liu said that one should seek in the state before the feelings are aroused. What do you think? Answer. If it means to preserve and nourish oneself before the feelings are aroused, that is all right. But if it means to seek equilibrium in the state before the feelings are aroused, that is incorrect. Further question. A student should, of course, exert effort to discipline himself as the feelings are aroused. How should he apply his effort before the feelings are aroused? Answer. How can we seek anything before the feelings are aroused. The only thing to do is to cultivate oneself every day. After a sufficient period of time, the feelings will naturally attain due measure and degree when they are aroused. Question. At the moment of equilibrium, is it true that the ear hears nothing and the eye sees nothing? Answer. Although the ear hears nothing and the eye sees nothing, nevertheless the principle of hearing and seeing must be already there before hearing and seeing are possible. Suppose you, sir, describe the condition of tranquility. Although the ear hears nothing and the eye sees nothing, there must always be the master inside to control them before they can see or hear nothing. It is not that they are always let alone, or that they are by nature empty and silent. Su Ping said, one cannot say that there is anything, but naturally one is conscious of something. The teacher said, since there is consciousness, there is activity. How can it be said to be tranquility? When people explain the sentence, if the Fu hexagram we see in the Fu hexagram we see the mind of heaven and earth, they all say that in the state of perfect tranquility we can see the mind of heaven and earth. This is wrong. The line at the bottom of the hexagram Fu indicates activity. How can we say that it is tranquility? The state before the feelings are aroused does not mean a state completely dark without any awareness. How can that be said to be tranquil? However, although consciousness is active, this does not gainsay the fact that it can remain unaroused. But pleasure, anger, sorrow, and joy are different. Someone asked, then perhaps we should seek tranquility in activity, is that right? Answer. That is all right, but it is most difficult to do. Buddhists most often talk about calmness. The sage, however, talked about resting or abiding, as in the teaching. As a ruler, one should abide in humanity. As a minister, one should abide in reverence. The hexagram Kun in the Book of Changes explains the meaning of stopping or resting. It says, resting in one's resting point is resting in one's proper place. Most people are unable to rest, for all things are complete in man. When things happen, one's mind is excessively aroused in accordance with the things it considers to be important. When it considers a particular thing as important, it is aroused as a result of that thing. If one can leave things as they are, one's mind will naturally not be aroused. All things are complete in man. If he is impartial and responds to things as they come and does so properly, he will be resting in his proper place. If he is partial, his inclinations will be affected by things. This is why most people are unable to rest. Someone asked, sir, you do think the state before the feelings are aroused is... Someone asked, sir, do you think the state before the feelings are aroused is active or tranquil? Answer, it is all right to describe it as tranquil, but there must be something in it. This is where the difficulty comes in. It is best that the student first hold fast to seriousness. If he is serious, he will understand all this. Someone asked, if something is in the state of tranquility, does this mean that the state embodies the principle of pleasure, anger, sorrow, and joy, although the feelings have not been expressed? Jushi answered, the feelings result when the mind is affected, like reflections in a mirror. Before the mirror reflects things, how can there be any reflection? Question. In that case, is the thing in the state of tranquility like the light in the mirror? Answer. You are nearly correct, but it is only something similar to it. The thing in tranquility is nothing but consciousness, that is all. Question. But Cheng said that as soon as there is consciousness, there is activity. Answer. In saying this, he went too far. If we say that we are conscious of this or that, as in knowing cold or warmth, that is to be conscious of something. But when there is no consciousness of anything but only consciousness, what harm is done to the state of tranquility? To sit in meditation does not mean to go to sleep. Question. When Master Cheng said that there must be something in the state of tranquility, is that the same as what you may mean by the consciousness not being beclouded? Answer. It merely means that in the state of tranquility principle is there, and that the mind is not a lump like something dead. There must be something means that there must be a master to hold fast the mind so it will not suffer the defects of emptiness or becloudedness, but one must not overdo it. This is where the difficulty comes in. The difficulty is the difficulty of understanding. Someone asked, how does one make an effort to be serious? Answer, there is nothing better than concentrating on one thing. Cheng said, I often suffer from unsettled thoughts. Before one thing is over, other things appear in great confusion. What can be done? Answer, this is no good. Fundamentally, this is due to insincerity. You must practice. When you practice to the point of being able to concentrate on one thing, you'll be all right. Whether in thought or in the handling of affairs, we must seek concentration. One can judge by his sleep whether his learning is profound or shallow. If in his sleep or dreams he is restless, it means his mind is not settled and his effort to preserve his mind is not firm. Question. When one's mind is attached to something that is good and he dreams about it, is that not harmless? Answer. Although the thing is good, nevertheless the mind is aroused. There is no harm if one dreams of something which is an omen. Otherwise, the mind is aroused erroneously. Omens refer to fortune and misfortune. When they are revealed in dreams, it means that the mind is acting according to the principle of influence and response. There is no harm in this. But if one dreams for no particular reason, it is all due to the mind's erroneous activity. One's mind must be calm. It should think only when it is directed to do so. But people today let their minds operate without direction. Question. Who directs the mind? Answer. When the mind directs the mind, it is all right. To let the mind operate without direction is to lose it. Is it not a defect to say that the mind directs the mind? Jushi answered, no defect. The idea is that the mind must have a master. When one holds fast to the mind, it will remain within him. If one loses it and does not know where to find it, it will drift as it pleases. To have the mind direct the mind is not to have two minds. It merely means that the mind as substance directs the mind as function. Hold the will firm and never do violence to the vital force. This is a mutual nourishment of the internal and the external life. Asked about the difference between the will and the vital force, Jushi said, let us talk about gladness and anger. Here is the thing. We should examine it to see whether it should make us glad or angry. If it is proper for us to be glad, then we should be glad. And if it is proper for us to be angry, then we should be angry. This is to hold the will firm. But if we are excessively glad and continue to be so, or excessively angry and continue to be so, our vital force will become violent. This is to do violence to the vital force. In the work of nourishing the vital force, both the internal and the external life must be mutually cultivated to the limit. Do not rely on holding the will and think that everything will be all right. If the vital force is not peaceful, the will not be at ease. To hold the will firm is to hold fast internally, and not to do violence to the vital force is to not to be reckless externally. As one holds fast internally, one's vital force will be completely preserved. As one is not reckless externally, one's will become stronger. Therefore, the internal and the external life mutually nourish each other. Question. Does the saying, express in words and tones, not mean that we should make an effort at our speech? Answer. We must cultivate ourselves internally. then our speech will naturally be in accord with principle. However, we should make an effort to be careful in speech and not to express ourselves erroneously. The teacher said to Cheng, "My physical endowment was very slight. By the time I was 30, it had gradually become stronger. It was not fully developed until I was 40 or 50. I am now 72. Compared to what I was during my prime, my tendons and bones are not any weaker." Cheng said, "Is it not true that because your endowment was slight, you have taken great care of yourself?" The teacher remained silent for some time and then said, "To me, to neglect one's life and submit to selfish desires is a great shame." Generally speaking, if one cannot calmly hold on to his mind, it is entirely because of his lack of humanity. The man of humanity is completely identified with the principle of nature. His mind is preserved and not lost. It is not necessary for him to exert special effort to hold it, and it is naturally at ease wherever it rests and remains calm. If one fails to hold on to it calmly, this shows that principle cannot overcome his desires, and that his mind has been seized by material things. Therefore, Master Cheng considers the failure to be due to the absence of humanity. Master Cheng said, "The extension of knowledge depends on nourishing our knowing faculty, and to nourish our knowing faculty there is nothing better than having few desires. When one's mind is calm, his words are careful and leisurely. When one's mind is not calm, his words are flippant and rash." Cheng Hao said, "Man has 404 troubles, none of which is under his control. As to the mind, it must be made to come under one's own control." Xie Shen Tao was with Master Ming Tao in Foucault. One day, Ming Tao told him, "You people accompany me here and only learn the way to talk. Therefore, in your learning, your minds and words do not correspond. Why not practice?" When he was asked what to practice, he said, "Suppose you sit in meditation." Whenever Cheng saw people sit in meditation, he praised them as skillful in learning. One day, Cheng Hao said, "You gentlemen here only learn my words. Why not earnestly practice?" The gentleman said, "We have nothing to practice." Cheng Hao said, "When there is nothing to put into practice, go and sit in meditation. For while sitting in meditation, we can cultivate our original mind and become calm to some degree. Although we are still not free from chasing after material things, when we come to an awakening, we can collect and concentrate our mind, and then there will be a solution." Chang Sai said, "In the beginning of learning, the important thing to know is the difference between having nothing in one's mind contrary to humanity for 3 months and doing so for a day or a month at the most. The one being internal and comparable to the host, while the other is external and comparable to the guest. We must exert our mind and will earnestly and gradually to the point where we cannot stop even if we wanted to. Anything beyond this does not depend on us. Not to have anything contrary to humanity means that humanity is inside the person and is the host or master, but it is not entirely at home and sometimes leaves him. To achieve humanity for a day or a month means that humanity is outside of the person and is a guest. Although it sometimes comes in, it does not stay long. What is beyond the ability to have for 3 months nothing contrary to humanity is a quality belonging to one who is great and completely transformed so that he is humanity itself. It is not something to be achieved with effort. Therefore it is said that it does not depend on us. One's mind is seldom clear, but most of the time is confused. When it is clear, one's vision is clear, and his hearing intelligent, and his 4 limbs are naturally respectful and careful without any rigid control. The opposite is true when the mind is confused. Why is this? It is because in the exercise of the mind one is not yet masterful, so that there are many wandering thoughts and few unwavering thoughts. As long as one has not gotten rid of the mind formed by habits and customs, the mind in its genuine aspect will not be complete. Someone asked, "Is there any difference between wandering thoughts and the mind formed by habits and customs? Jushi answered, there is a difference. Wandering thoughts are vague and drifting, while the mind formed by habits and customs is the mind in which habits and influences of the past are dominant. The mind in its genuine aspect is the mind of moral principles. One must also be strong. If too weak, he is likely to be unable to establish himself. There are those who by nature are neither glad nor angry. They must also be strong. When one is strong, he will firmly hold on to his position without yielding and advance toward the way with courage. Compared to others, I am in fact more courageous. Making fun either in action or in words is harmful to what we are doing. Our will also be dissipated by our vital force. Not to make fun is a way to control the vital force. When one starts to rectify his mind, he should regard his own mind as a stern teacher. Then he will be cautious in all his actions. If he can firmly hold on to this for a year or two, his mind will naturally be rectified. One's mind becomes brilliant and intelligent only after it is calm. If it changes all the time and is not calm, where can brilliance and intelligence be found? Generally, the Book of Changes considers the hexagram Ken to stop as expressing the principle of resting. If one rests properly, one becomes brilliant and intelligent. Therefore, in the great learning, it is said that only after being calm can one be tranquil, have peaceful repose, and finally deliberate. If one's mind is unsettled, there is no way by which it can be brilliant or intelligent. Brilliance and intelligence result if the mind is tranquil and calm. Still water can reflect, but running water cannot. The principle is the same. When one's actions and resting all take place at the proper time, his way of procedure is brilliant and intelligent. The student must time his actions and resting properly, and then his way will not be beclouded but clear and brilliant. People today study for a long time and do not seem to achieve any progress. This is precisely because they do not know when to act or to rest. When one sees others fuss around, he follows them, although what they do has nothing to do with him. As a result, his study is neglected. From the point of view of the doctrine of the sage, he will simply continue like this to the end of his life. Can that be called brilliant or intelligent? Earnestness, sincerity, vacuity, and tranquility are the foundation of humanity. Not to be flippant or faulty means to be earnest and sincere. When the mind is not obstructed or obscured, it will be vacuous and tranquil. It is difficult to understand humanity suddenly. In order to understand it, one must cultivate the way for a long time and practice it concretely, and only then can he appreciate the meaning of humanity, for humanity must be well cultivated.